So we don't know how this is going to turn out. Maybe we'll avert disaster, but it's a reflection of just what a total aberration Trump is.
To Donald Trump's announcement about sanctioning the ICC. What do you think?
Well, I think it's the right thing to do. I've thought for many years that the ICC was an illegitimate institution. The United States is not a member of it. Israel's not a member of it. I think the risks that I've seen for a long time of an unaccountable prosecutor pursuing his own theories before an unaccountable court are coming true. And it's a myth that an institution like this can really have an effect. It doesn't deter the authoritarian governments, and it gives a false sense of security, as if there is this kind of law in a lawless world.
Well, I'm sure many would disagree with you. And indeed, 79 countries around the world and counting have seemingly united in opposition to his plan. What does that tell you?
Well, they're free to do what they want, but we're not a party to the court, and this is an assertion of very powerful executive authority, the power of prosecution, with no accountability. No democratically elected entity elected the prosecutor. No democratically accountable body put the people on the court. This is the kind of fantasy about international law that almost invariably benefits the people that in theory the law is trying to constrain. So I don't see the United States becoming a member of the ICC within the lifetime of anybody listening to this program.
Right. Well, it is one of many controversies that Donald Trump has unleashed since he rejoined the White House. Canada becoming 51st state, threatening war with Denmark over Greenland, taking ownership of the Gaza Strip, shipping out 2 million Palestinians. It's kind of a blizzard of controversy, isn't it? Is it all going to happen?
Well, I think very little of it's going to happen, but I do think what it shows is that Trump will be just as incoherent and uncontrollable in a second term as he was in the first term. And that's unfortunate in a number of respects, not the least of which is that all of this distracts from focus on the real adversaries we face, the threats from China, the threats from Russia, the threats of nuclear proliferation from Iran and North Korea. So instead of concentrating on where the real dangers lie, we're being distracted by Trump and his kind of unconstrained rhetoric.
So Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping will be rubbing their hands in glee at the moment.
Well, what could be better from the Chinese point of view in particular than a trade war between the United States on the one hand and Canada and Mexico on the other? You couldn't make that up. If you tried to publish that in a novel in China, it would be rejected.
And that trade war, I mean, what impact do you think that will have on America itself and the rest of the world?
Well, it's potentially a model for what could happen with the rest of the world, and I think it's particularly ironic that Mexico and Canada were the initial targets, because Donald Trump himself renegotiated the NAFTA free trade agreement into what was now called USMCA, culminating in the new treaty in 2019. And yet the first thing he does is reject the very treaty that he had helped negotiate. So we don't know how this is going to turn out. Maybe we'll avert disaster, but it's a reflection of just what a total aberration Trump is, and why his presidency, I think, although it will cause damage, we can see that already, it is an aberration that every day that goes by is one day further into the 4 years.
Yeah, but that aberration could do a lot of damage in that 4 years.
Well, of course it could, but it depends on having more people stand up to some of the ridiculous things that he proposes. And while it's been late coming, I think at least in the Republican Party, while a lot of members of Congress are intimidated about the prospect of opposing Trump, it's getting easier and easier to do.
Yeah, I just wonder, though, when you look at, I mean, just quoting from Gerard Baker, who wrote a column in the Times this morning, he pointed out that a lot of his first-term controversies, which were greeted with sort of howls of outrage, for example, the recognition in 2017 of Jerusalem, he picks out also the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, those two instances actually now you look back and think, well, there was method in what some of his critics would describe as madness.
Well, I think those were both entirely justified, whether it was Donald Trump or not, and they're both examples of what Trump bases his decisions on. And it may sound contrary to all experience people have had, but the fact is he doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't have a national security grand strategy. He doesn't do policy as we understand that word. He's very transactional and he sees things through the prism of what benefits Donald Trump. So, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital has been the declared legislative policy of the United States for almost 30 years. It's just that other presidents waived the provision in law that Congress had adopted, and Trump didn't. And opposition within the United States to his doing that is effectively zero today because recognizing reality is usually a good thing. And, it turns out Jerusalem is Israel's capital. And in terms of eliminating Qasem Soleimani, he saw that as something that would gain him a lot of favorable publicity, which it did. For good reason, because Qasem Soleimani over decades was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers. So he got what he deserved.
Because he was the head of Iran's Quds force. And just while we're on the subject of Iran, he's signed more executive orders reinstating maximum pressure against Iran. But then he removed your security. Are you personally concerned by that?
Sure. I think the Iranians have made it clear they're going to try and seek retaliation against people they associate with the strike against Soleimani, starting with Trump himself. And Trump's very aware of that. He said the other day that he had left orders that if he were assassinated by Iran, the U.S. should obliterate Iran. So he knows what the consequences are. It's his decision, not just with respect to my Secret Service protection that President Biden had restored, but others who face exactly the same thing. He cut their protection off as well. It's a question of character or lack thereof, a very, very petty and vindictive move.
Well, how worried are you about that, though? I mean, does it sort of prey on your mind?
Well, it's hard to avoid, but this has been true for a long time. The Justice Department, in my case, maybe they were a little bit farther along in Tehran, but filed criminal charges against a member of the Revolutionary Guard for trying to hire a hitman to assassinate me. So we're not talking about chatter on the internet here. There's hard intelligence that underlies the threat assessment, which has been constant now for over 3 years.
Mm. Looking at one other policy area that Donald Trump talked very big on in the run-up to resuming office, and we've heard not that much. The Munich Security Conference next Friday, there might be more detail on what Trump sees happening in Ukraine. What do you think might be forthcoming there?
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance is set to go, and I assume he will give a speech during the campaign. He said that a settlement in Ukraine that he would find acceptable would be a ceasefire along the existing front lines, creation of a demilitarized zone to separate the combatants, and then negotiations for a longer term settlement, but a commitment by Ukraine not to join NATO, which is a settlement that they could have written in the Kremlin with some delight. So I think if Vance in fact goes to Munich and does speak, it'll be very interesting to compare what he says there with what he said on the record in a speech during the campaign. Will it be the same view or will it have changed, and in what direction? I personally am very worried about what could happen to Ukraine because I think what Trump made clear during the campaign was that he wants the war over, he wants it behind him, and he wants it done soon, which implies he doesn't care that much about the terms on which the war ends. He just wants it over with.
Mm. Do you think JD Vance will change tack then? I mean, there is some, there's talk, isn't there, of Trump espousing these kind of maximalist positions where he talks big and then he actually settles for something far less radical.
Well, we'll see. I don't think Vance will say anything that Trump doesn't agree with. But, Donald Trump wasn't the first person to invent a bargaining style where you give your maximalist position. The question is whether he really understands what he's doing. And unfortunately, since he often does not understand what's at stake in international affairs, his position is only coincidentally related to U.S. national interest.
Mm. You have given some useful advice to Peter Mandelson, incoming ambassador from the UK to the US, on how to deal with this new president. One of those pieces of advice was playing golf. Just unpack that for us.
Well, I thought that the foreign leader who did the best job of advancing his country's interest with Trump in the first term was Shinzo Abe of Japan, and he was an avid golfer. And what it did was give him an opportunity to talk with Trump in an unhurried atmosphere. He didn't have to ask for anything. He wasn't presenting a problem. He wasn't criticizing Trump. And I think it's the opportunity that Abe took golfing, calling on the telephone, visiting Trump in the White House, of being in constant touch with him that helped develop a very good relation. So if people in Britain who are going to encounter Trump happen to play golf, I think that's an advantage for them.
Can you see Peter Mandelson playing golf?
Beats me. I hope he enjoys himself in Washington. That's all I can say.
Finally, big thought really for the end. Where do you see America in 4 years' time? You've made clear the risks you see from this Trump presidency, but where do you see the world heading and America within that world?
Well, I think the threats around the world are increasing. I think the China-Russia axis continues to form and expand its reach. So I think we're in a very dangerous time for that and many other reasons. This is exactly the wrong time to have somebody like Trump president. So the best we can hope for is to muddle through until the end of it, hope that there are no significant crises, and then celebrate the 22nd Amendment and the two-term limitation because Trump can't run for a third term.
Some say he'll lead us into a world war before then.
Well, look, it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on who he listens to. It depends on how adventurous China and Russia and others think they can be, and it will depend on political factors that we can't really foresee. But I think Trump is not fit to be president. I've said that for a long time. My view hasn't changed.
Ambassador John Bolton, thanks very much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.